Welcome to the Bigger Room Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Bender.
And I'm Mel Cobian, and today we're going to talk about the 3 steps to becoming a better communicator coming from a place of love. But by love, we mean LUV, which stands for listen, understand, and validate. So, Jill, how important do you think communication is, whether it's in business or with your significant other? Let's talk about that.
Communication is probably one of the most important things I know, especially for a relationship and even friendships, even like parents and kids. You avoid communication, people start assuming things. This is still relationship related, but people start assuming things. They are not getting what they need from you in order to make a good decision. And in business, communication absolutely is going to help you more than hinder you.
Yeah, and these skills usually stem from when you're a kid. Your communication skills. So depending on how you grew up, how your parents taught you, you tend to kind of mirror the dynamics that you grew up. For example, I was thinking today, gosh, my poor parents. I love them so much, but my parents never said I'm sorry to each other in front of us growing up.
And you knew this?
Well, as an adult, as a married person that's been married for 10 years, I can look back and still be the one that has to give my parents relationship advice. But, as a kid, you're growing up and you don't see people saying I'm sorry to each other. That definitely had kind of an effect. I was a very quiet kid, but just having to learn what an apology meant, it means a lot to somebody. Maybe for you, you don't see it as a form of communication, but just something that important to somebody else comes from the first pillar, which is listening to what other people need so that you can communicate in their love language. So that's different for everyone. And you don't realize what your love language is for communication until, you're put in those situations where you have to figure it out.
My son is actually, he tells me a lot, Mom, do you know you're really supposed to say sorry right now? Because you did this. I'm like, well, I didn't do that intentionally, but okay, yes, I'm sorry that happened. It was an accident, and so he's confused about when it's appropriate, but he definitely tells me often, Mom, do you know that most people would say this at this time, Mom? I'm like, what the hell, kid? You're 7. You're schooling me on how I should be saying things to you. So I am learning more now, even as a mom.
Yeah, but you're being an empathetic listener because maybe you didn't think that was worthy of an apology, but you put somebody else's, feelings by listening to what they needed. So that maybe his brain, right? His 7-year-old brain, like, I need to hear this so that I can move on.
Yeah. It's usually something that is simple, whereas they are so basic with what they know because they don't have all this other stuff that's come into our lives and the stuff we grew up, the relationships we've had. And so everything is black and white to them. And they know you're supposed to say sorry at that time, or they know there's, those things. And yes, sometimes you don't really think that it's that big of a deal. Yeah. I can say I have had to change the way I communicate with a lot of things with him, because I do have to stop and go, okay, he's little. Like, these tiny little things do mean a lot to him, and I have to make sure. And it's not that I don't say sorry. I'm not an asshole here. It's other situations that I just can't think of an example of, but I have had to think about it a lot more. Okay, I do need to make the extra effort to make something a little bit more clear. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which you probably had to figure out as somebody in a marriage.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes when the thing is, like, in a marriage, right? Like, arguments happen and things like that, and or disagreements. And sometimes you're getting ready to say your next line while the other person is talking to you. They're telling you exactly what they need from you, and you're not actively listening because your brain's like, I'm going to say this and I'm going to defend myself. And so then you're not communicating. So communication starts by listening and by setting aside your feelings and creating a safe space for the other person, which is sometimes easier said than done.
And this might come up with your other pillars, but someone had just reached out to me and they're like, hey, this is what I'm noticing about you lately. It was more related to what I am and not doing with my online business and with my work. And she said, this is just what I'm observing, but I just kind of feel like you need a little bit of a kick in the ass. So here you go. And so I think our natural instinct is to immediately, our brain is going to defend. They're going to defend themselves first. That's going to be the first, like, I'm not doing that, or I don't need to fix it, or I purposely am doing what you're saying I'm doing. And so I just replied to her and I said, before I can respond, I think I do need to think about what you said, because you probably are right, but I have to make it right in my own head before I can say anything, because my initial response is to defend what you just said and to validate why I'm doing what you're saying I'm doing. So, but yeah, before I communicated, which probably when I was even a year ago, I would have been like, that's not right. It's because of this. But now I know enough to let's stop, let's think, and then we will figure out the best way to respond.
Yeah, and exactly. And that leads us to this second pillar of communication, which is understanding. And I think this one is also a little tricky for a lot of people, because just because you listened to someone, it doesn't mean that you actively understand what they're saying. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with their feelings or opinions. All it means is that you have to acknowledge and validate their feelings and understand them, which I think is the hardest thing for people to do.
Right. And we've said that before. People are listening so they can respond. They're not listening to fully understand where that person's coming from, why they're saying it.
And it's because we all grew up different. Yeah. But it's, again, like, communication isn't just like, you listen, you understand, and you validate. Like, it's not that simple. Those are three things that play a role, but it's always going to go back to, how does this person communicate, and what do I need to understand about how they communicate, so that I can just disconnect from, being reactive to the situation and just hearing them out. I also wanted to highlight that just because you listen to somebody talk and you tell them, I understand you, and then you throw in the word but that isn't necessarily reflecting upon what they said. Because a lot of the times our brain, when it hears the word but, it's like everything you said before but doesn't matter to the brain. So it's like, Jill, I understand what you said, but I don't agree. And it's like, all you're going to hear is, I don't agree. So we go back to, trying to just reflect on what the person said. And what works really well is just repeating to the person to assure them that you're listening. Like, thank you for sharing that, Jill. I understand. I understand what you're trying to say.
But
what are you gonna add? But I don't like that word.
But really does kind of just like, I'm just gonna repeat what you said, and then I'm gonna dismiss it by throwing in, but here's my real opinion of what you just said, and I'm gonna completely dismiss everything that you just told me.
Yeah. Yes, it's like, think about whether it's the kids or your partner. You just got home. I appreciate you taking out the trash, but it's spilling all over the floor, and it's like the brain. It's like, are you thanking me? Are you trying to communicate something? So it's like, start paying attention to how many times you use the word but, and replace it with the word and that is a little bit more rewarding and more positive for the brain.
So if you use your example, I appreciate that you took out the garbage and that you spilled it all over the floor.
No. They'll like reverse it, and Like, so it's actually, I should probably back up. So a good way to fix the but situation is actually inverting your sentence and saying like, hey, there's like liquid spilled all over the trash, and I appreciate you taking it out. So like, it's like, hey, just, can we do better next time? Yes, no, maybe so.
I could maybe get on board with that.
Yeah. I actually learned that from Alex Hormozy, surprisingly. He was talking about using that. Yeah, he was talking about how you can use that against people during a set, like when you're trying to sell them. Most people, when they have an objection, right, they'll throw in the but this, but that. So trying to just kind of flip what they're saying and then insert it, replace the buts with ands, has a positive effect.
Yeah. And a positive is always going to go a bit further in your communication.
Yeah. Yeah, which leads us to that last third pillar of the 3 steps for better communication, which is validation. What does validation mean, Joe?
Validation, you're validating. Well, I would think of it as you're validating what that person's opinion is. You're validating that it is their opinion, that you hear it and understand it.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people, when they validate someone, even though they feel completely against what they're saying or they just, complete disagreement, validating someone doesn't have to mean that you agree with them at all whatsoever, but it just means that you're respecting them enough to give them the room, give them the time to express their feelings. And we all perceive everything completely different because of the way we grew up. Again, we're talking about how these skills are something that literally start the moment that you're conscious when you're a kid. So, and it never stops. So the moment you start applying these 3 steps, these 3 pillars to better communication, you're going to see your relationships improve with your business partners, with your friends, with your significant other, with your kids, because they play such a critical role in learning how to communicate. And it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody's different.
So Bigger Room fans, take this advice. Communication is key. It's going to help you in every aspect of your life. Listen to what people are talking about. Give them a chance and think before you respond. Give it some time. Especially if it's a bigger topic, a bigger subject that you should give it some time. Think it over. Understand where they're coming from. Validate that their opinion is their opinion. Validate that it's not you saying whatever they just said. And even if you don't agree with it, it's still their opinion. It's still what they wanted to get off their chest. And give it some time before you jump in and start responding to it.
Yeah, don't be reactive. So if you start feeling reactive with whoever it is, just remember that sometimes that person might just need a hug. So maybe if they're going on and just being emotional, trying to communicate with you, don't react to the things they're saying. Just take a step back and maybe you just ask the person, like, do you want to talk this through or do you just need a hug? Because it could really just be that simple. And just remember to continue to seek to understand the person in front of you, because if it bothers you that much, it means that you care about the person, whether that's your friend, your significant other, your kids. It's all about healing and fixing the ways to communicate so that it's always going to get better. It's always going to get better.
Especially with kids. I have definitely learned this a lot with my own child, because I don't want him to be upset and I don't want him to be, we generally get along really well. And, but there's sometimes, like, we'll be on our way home from hockey and he's tired. He's had a long day. Now he just played hockey for a full hour. It's time for him to go to bed. And I could be talking to him in the car about something that we would have normally just talked about in the car, and he will freak out on me. Like, yeah, what the hell? I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to get so upset about this. Mom, I am blah, blah, blah. And then he'll ramp that up instead of, sometimes he does just say, well, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm just, whatever. But there's times where he still is getting even more upset. I'm like, all right, so I have learned with him for sure. I just kind of let it go, and I don't really. There's not really anything I could say. I can agree with him or disagree with him, and he's still going to go down this path. But it's because he's tired. So I'm understanding the fact that he's tired. I listened to what he said, okay, and then sometimes I just have to say, okay. And then if we want to talk about it another day when he's not tired, then we will talk about it then. But
Yes.
knowing when to let it go and knowing when to step back, and it's a learning process. But
Yeah.
when
communication is everything. Which is why we wanted to pass on some valuable information to you guys. And I just wanted to quickly recommend a book. Because sometimes maybe it's a relationship with yourself that you need to strengthen. Maybe you need to learn to listen to your mind. You need to learn to understand your thoughts. And most importantly, validate your feelings. Even if you don't really understand, it's a journey. So learning how to communicate with yourself, with your mind. The Untethered Soul is a book that really, really helped me. And it really did change my life, because it takes you through that journey of the inner voice that we all have, right? We all talk to ourselves. We all say things that maybe you wouldn't say out loud, and you would never say to your best friend. So if you wouldn't say those words to your best friend, why are they in your head? Why are you saying those things to yourself? So if you feel you need to go on that journey and of self-development, The Untethered Soul is an amazing book.
Good recommendation.
Yeah.
I have not heard of it.
If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody that you think can benefit from learning the love method.
And thank you so much for joining us. We would so appreciate it if you would be willing to leave us a review. It helps push our podcast out to other people, other listeners who could use this information. As always, thank you for joining us. See you next time.